I just know you're ready to hear about a little crime. Welcome to Crime Daddies.
Warning, this podcast is hosted by two true crime dads that will talk about murder, drugs, rape, and offenses against children. We may crack jokes and make light of something so terrible that has happened, but it will never be about the victim or the victim's family. You have been warned. Welcome back to Crime Daddies, everybody. I am Hunter.
And I am Jacob.
And we are so thankful and happy to have you here for another week with your Crime Daddies.
Thank you guys for being here every week, and just tuning in and being a part of our routines, because it's been really cool to interact with you guys and talk with you guys and honestly just do these cases and bring them to you. So thank you.
And I want to address something while we're here. So at the time that we are recording this episode, we want to thank everybody for getting us over 10,000 streams, and actually we're knocking on 12,000 streams. So again, I want to thank every single one of our listeners, and thank you so much for being loyal and joining us every single week.
10,000 streams is not something I figured we were going to have in the first 90 days. And so the fact that we have it, and the fact that it's been a consistent, gradual growth, and you guys tend to join every week, and every time we drop a new episode, it's like we're finding new people and getting to know new listeners every time. It's been so awesome. So thank you so much for 10,000 listens, and we hope that you guys are here for 10,000 more.
Absolutely. We hope that all of our day ones are going to be with us when Crime Daddies gets over 100,000 streams and even 1 million streams.
Yep, and you guys can all be the ones that said, I was here ever since the beginning.
All right, so enough going off on a tangent about that. We can't thank you all enough. I think you guys get the point that we're very appreciative of you all. So without further ado, Jacob, what are you bringing to the table today?
Well, before I actually get into the case, Hunter, I want to just give you some context and talk about something that kind of sits underneath everything about the case, and that's poverty. Now, I'm sure you know, and many people in this area might also know, but for the ones who don't, where the story takes place, and honestly where we're from in general, isn't just a random spot on the map. Whenever you look at Southeast Missouri, especially the Boot Heel part of Southeast Missouri, and then you kind of zoom out, you're looking at this entire stretch along the Mississippi River, which includes Northeast Arkansas, Northwest Mississippi, West Tennessee, Southern Illinois, and Western Kentucky. That whole corridor is part of what's often called the Delta region of the United States, and it's constantly one of the poorest areas in the whole country. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the national poverty rate is a little over 10%, which comes out to roughly 35 to 37 million Americans living below the poverty line. So we have 350 million people in America, and 35 million of them are poor, which is an enormous portion of the country. Like, just picture 35 million people. That's bigger than some countries even have, and that's how many of us actually live in poverty.
Yeah, and your Crime Daddies actually can relate to this because, certain part of my life, I was a part of that statistic of being in the poverty line.
Yeah, so we are the statistic. We are part of the census records from years before. We lived it.
Yeah, I remember when I was like 3-4 years old, my dad got laid off from his job. My mom, hadn't gone back to work yet because she had me, and we was living in the government housing projects behind Taco Bell and Dexter. So once my dad got out of college, he got a job, and then my mom got a teaching job. So we moved out of there, and we was able to better ourselves. So I in no way ever think that I'm better than anybody else that's in that situation, because I've been there and I've lived it.
Yeah, I'm talking trailer park, whenever you think of trailer trash, that's kind of what we are. There was this place right in Stoddard County. It was called Gaslight Village, and it was kind of tucked between Dexter and Bloomfield. And everyone knew that Gaslight Village was just like a trailer park in the woods, and you knew what was going on back there. It was just crime central, drug central, and we lived out there for years. Now, it's funny because they got rid of all the trailers, and now there's like a tiny home business, and people can go and live out and rent these little tiny houses. But it used to be all trailer parks and pit bulls on chains over there, and I lived there for years. But back to what we're talking about is whenever you narrow that down to Mississippi, for example, which I'm sure you guys have heard, is usually considered the poorest state. And that number jumps around to about 17 to 18%. So 18% of the population in Mississippi lives in poverty. But what really puts things into perspective is that you do not have to go very far to see those same conditions right here in Southeast Missouri. There's plenty of counties along the Boot Heel, right on the Mississippi River, where you're seeing poverty rates that are in that exact same range as Mississippi. New Madrid County sits somewhere around 17 to 19%, depending on the data set that you look at, which is right there, if not more than Mississippi, which is also nearly double the national average. Again, the national average is 10%. New Madrid County is about 19%. And I'm not just saying that because I looked it up for this episode. I'm saying that because I live in this area and I know this to be true. I work in this specific field. If you guys don't know, my profession is I work in a nonprofit, a community action agency to be specific. And what we do is we cover 6 counties in the Delta region. So I'm really in these communities all the time. And community action agencies, if you guys want a little history tour, were put in place by Lyndon B. Johnson back in the 1960s as a war on poverty. And so what we do is we put systems in place for people that don't have access to education or nutrition or other things in life to get access to those items to better themselves. I work specifically with the youth in this area, and we provide nutrition and education to them through some different government programs. And like Hunter said, not only do I work in this, but I grew up in this. I was one of the kids that benefited from a community action agency because my family was poor growing up. So to me, these numbers are just not nothing. They're a reflection of the life I lived. I've seen what poverty looks like, and I see what it looks like whenever it settles into a region. And sometimes it can settle into a family for generations and generations.
And unfortunately, when there's poverty, there's going to be crime. And like Jacob said, New Madrid County is one of the poorest counties in Missouri. And if you go back through our track list of episodes, this is actually going to be the 3rd episode out of New Madrid County out of 10.
Interesting, isn't it? So like you said, whenever you look at poverty, especially in rural areas such as this one, it affects far more than income. It impacts the infrastructure, the education, healthcare, job opportunities, mental health, and eventually your decision making. Schools in poorer areas often have fewer resources. They have older facilities. They have a harder time attracting and keeping experienced teachers. Teachers want to go be at the good school. They don't want to be at the school where it's hard to work at, right? With the kids that are hard to deal with because these kids don't have proper nutrition. And whenever you don't have proper nutrition, you're not going to be able to be educated right. And so you're going to have a bunch of kids that just act up, and teachers don't want to be there, especially qualified teachers, right? They want to go to the school that's going to pay them more and have easier kids. And what happens in these circumstances is people tend to feel trapped. And if they feel trapped long enough, they start to get frustrated. And eventually, whenever you're frustrated for long enough, that can turn into substance abuse, crime, violence, or just a general sense of hopelessness. People stop thinking long term and they start thinking about survival. They're not really thinking about what's going to happen in 5 years. They're thinking about what's going to happen in 5 minutes. And what happens is one bad decision creates consequences, and those consequences make life harder. And eventually the next bad decision becomes easier to justify. Now, none of that excuses what happens today in this case. There is no justification for taking someone's life, and the victim and her family deserve to remain at the center of the story above all else. But I did want to paint this background because you needed to understand how people arrive at certain places. Because most of the time, people are not born monsters. They are shaped over years by their environment, their pressure, choices, and consequences. And at the center of this story is a woman named Brenda Smith. Brenda was born on September 8th, 1955 in Perryville, Missouri, to Sylvester and Rita Wibbenmeyer. She grew up in the kind of small-town environment where family names meant something and where your upbringing tended to shape the person you become. As she got older, her life followed a path that would probably feel familiar to a lot of people listening to this. She got married to Mr. Jimmy Smith in 1973. Eventually, she moved to Parma and built her life around work, family, and community. Sounds like the life that we all live around here, right?
Yeah, it sounds like the life I'm trying to build currently.
That's all it is. You find your spouse, you move, you find work, you build a family, you build a community, you become a part of it. And so she became a mother to Chris, Talisha, and Sarah. And over time, that family grew into grandchildren and then eventually great-grandchildren. The kind of family where there was always somebody around, always something going on, always another reason to gather together. I'm sure you can relate to that, can't you, Hunter?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Miss Brenda worked at several places, one of them being Winchester Place, and one of them is the D&L One Stop. These jobs weren't glamorous, but they were steady and they were honest jobs. But people did not remember Brenda because where she worked. They remembered her because of the way she treated people. Now, everything written about her points towards the same kind of person. She's warm, outgoing. She's the type of woman who made everyone feel comfortable immediately. She loved cooking, not just because she enjoyed it, but because it brought people together. She liked big meals, crowded tables, conversations that lasted for hours and hours. And from what I've heard from some people close to her, her chicken and dumplings and her turkey dressing were the kind of meals that people still talk about to this day, years later. So apparently she can throw down in the kitchen.
So it sounds like Brenda was literally everybody's favorite grandma. Like, if you grew up having a grandma that you loved dearly, it sounds like Brenda was that grandma.
She is the stereotypical Midwest Southern grandma that is just all smiles, full of love, and just throws down in the kitchen and just makes everyone happy. And she likes to have everybody at her house.
So I like to put my 2 cents in on this. My grandma has several grandkids and she's got even more great grandkids. And we tried to talk her into just saying, hey, how about grandma, instead of we cooking at your house and eating and dirtying up a bunch of dishes and you having to cook all day, why don't we just all go somewhere to eat? Everybody pays their own bill. It's not going to be a financial burden on anybody. And she cried. I know that it's because all of her family being at her house means something more to her than having to cook and do dishes.
Yeah, and that reminds me a lot of my grandma because she had 3 kids, and then my uncle, he had 3 kids himself. My aunt had 3 kids. And my dad, he had 7 kids. And so they're looking at 13 grandkids, and then all those grandkids are having kids. My grandma ended up having like 20 great grandkids. And whenever she was alive on the holidays, she would like to prepare all the food herself with maybe a few people helping her, but she wanted it all at her house. And it wasn't until her later years that we started to move it over to my cousin's house. And you could see it kind of ate at her because she could not do it like she wanted to. And even after she passed away, it's all changed. Everyone just brings their own dish to Thanksgiving or Christmas. Whenever it was grandma, everything's cooked at her house. Everything was. So that's kind of how Miss Brenda is. She treated people the way that she wanted to be treated. She did the golden rule. There was not really a difference in how she showed up for people either. Everybody had the same kindness and respect from her. And then there are some small details that make somebody feel really real outside of the headline. Her family even jokes about how much she loved crab legs from Red Lobster, which is a tiny detail, but it just shows you how human she was. And she's not just a victim in a case file. Like, she was an actual grandma.
I don't know. Those cheddar biscuits are awfully good. Like, that would probably be my favorite menu item, even though it's not a menu item. It's just, an appetizer that they give you. But I love Red Lobster's cheddar biscuits.
Man, if I can just have both of them, crab legs and cheddar biscuits. I mean, I've never went to Red Lobster and not been satisfied. But this was a real woman, and she had a lot of routines, and she had preferences. She had inside jokes with people. She had traditions, and people loved her very deeply. By 2015, Brenda was getting close to retirement. After decades of working and raising her family, life was finally reaching a point where things were supposed to slow down a little bit. When I'm talking about close to retirement, some reports say that she was only days away from retiring. So then came May 18th, 2015. Just before 6 in the morning, Brenda and her coworker, Helen Shepard, arrived at the D&L One Stop in Parma to open the store for the day. According to testimony later given in court, there had recently been another robbery in the area, so the women had gotten into a habit of entering the store together instead of the one person going in alone. It was still pretty early enough that the roads were mostly empty. It's a small town, and so it wasn't really busy, but it's also just right before 6 o'clock, like it's like 5:45. The women unlocked the front door and stepped inside, but before they could shut and relock it, a man wearing a partial face covering forced his way into the store holding a revolver. According to Helen Shepard's testimony, he immediately began demanding money and ordering them to open the safe. The problem was the women had literally just entered the building and had not even had access to the money yet. Brenda tried explaining that to the individual, but the situation escalated very quickly. The man held the revolver near the right side of her head and continued demanding money while threatening to shoot her. Helen would later describe him as speaking very calmly, almost softly, which somehow makes everything a little bit more unsettling. He wasn't screaming, he wasn't panicked, he was pretty calm. And at one point, according to her testimony, Brenda told him something along the lines of, "You might as well shoot me because I can't get this money." And unfortunately, he did just that.
What a piece of shit coward. I hate this guy because it feels like you just killed everybody's grandma.
The gunshot was fired at near contact range, Hunter. like right up to her head. In a matter of seconds, a woman who had spent decades building a family, working honest jobs, cooking meals for people that she loved, and becoming part of the fabric of her town, was lying on the floor of a convenience store that she worked at.
I don't know where this case is going, so I don't know what the end result is, but just from what you told me, if this guy is locked up currently and he has any chance of parole, we're all going to ride with Brenda, and we're going to make sure he does not get parole for any reason whatsoever. Because he feels like he shot everyone's grandma.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the town grandma. She has a huge family, and he just, for the sake of some money, because he's poor, took it from him. And we're going to talk about how that leads to some decisions later in the case, but just keep that in the back of your mind. According to more testimony, the robber initially started towards the doors as if he was going to leave after pulling the trigger, but then he turned back around and he focused his attention on Miss Helen Shepard, which was the co-worker. When she explained that she could not open the safe either, he threatened her and pushed her toward the back of the store. Eventually realizing he was not getting into the safe, he demanded lottery tickets instead. Lottery tickets. Hunter, lottery tickets.
Yeah, he's already made a huge mistake because lottery tickets are traced.
Idiot.
Not only is he a piece of shit for shooting this lady, but he's also a huge dumbass.
Yeah. And so Helen began tearing tickets from the rolls and giving them over because obviously she just saw her coworker get shot and she does not want the same thing to happen to her. So after taking enough tickets, the robber left the store and immediately Helen calls 911. Now, Brenda was rushed to the hospital in Dexter, but later died from a gunshot wound. Now, I don't want to talk negatively about the individuals who work at the Dexter Hospital, but I will say there is a bit of a stereotype about the Dexter Hospital that if you're from this area, you know that if you need the best care, you go to Poplar Bluff or Sykeston or Cape.
Yeah, when my brother actually got stabbed, he got rushed from Essex, Missouri to Sykeston Hospital, and they kept my brother alive, even though he lost so much blood that they said that technically he should have died, but he ended up making it.
Wow.
So anybody can say what they want about Sykeston Hospital, but I will say this, they kept my brother alive.
Yeah, and so Dexter, just for the sake of being a small town, they are not equipped for such tragedies. So obviously, whenever something like this happens in a small town, news spreads pretty quickly in a town like Parma. The owners of the D&L One Stop later described Brenda as family, saying that she had dealt with break-ins before, but nothing had ever turned deadly. She had been able to de-escalate situations in the past because she's just a nice grandma, right? While investigators processed the scene and tried piecing together what happened, the community was already beginning to grieve. The break in this case came about 6 days later. On May 24th, 2015, a man attempted to cash lottery tickets at a convenience store in Stoddard County. These tickets were rejected by the machines, obviously. At one store, the employee handed the ticket back. That happened in Bernie. He was in Bernie, and he tried to give the ticket, and the employee just gave it back.
So he had to have been traveling Highway 25 to go from Dexter to Bernie to try and cash lottery tickets.
And this happened on May 24th, which is right around the time of the 100-mile yard sale.
Yeah, Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah.
So.
Just interesting. If you're from around here, you know what that is. At another store, the clerk even tore the ticket in half before giving it back to him because they knew it was bogus.
So I'm assuming these clerks knew to, call the cops that somebody's trying to cash stolen lottery tickets.
Exactly. Police were contacted, surveillance footage was reviewed, and investigators began tracing the tickets back to the robbery in Parma. Obviously, the trail eventually led investigators to a 19-year-old Dion Martin. By then, Martin and his girlfriend had traveled to St. Louis and were visiting a place called Grant's Farm when police caught up with them. Family members of Martin's girlfriend had already began warning her after hearing he may have been connected to the robbery and shooting, and eventually she cooperated with the investigators. When officers searched the vehicle, they found additional lottery tickets connected to the robbery. Investigators later searched Martin's home in Parma and recovered even more lottery tickets, a revolver with one empty chamber, clothing believed to be connected to the robbery, and some other evidence that just ties them back to the crime.
So, obviously, in today's world, we have DNA evidence and all that. But just off the circumstantial evidence, this guy can already be convicted.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty cut and dry. He has the dang lottery tickets, not only at his house, but in his car.
And I'm sure they got video evidence that it was him trying to cash them at the stores.
Yep, they have a bunch of CCTV footage. And so while this guy was in St. Louis at a family attraction with a bunch of kids laughing and tourists walking around, people feeding goats at this farm. No one knew that sitting nearby was somebody that investigators now believed had taken the life of a woman back in a small Boot Hill town. According to court records, Martin later admitted to shooting Brenda. He told investigators he left his house around 5:15 that morning and waited near the store before it opened. He admitted taking the gun from his stepfather's closet days earlier. One of the details that later stood out during the investigation was his reported explanation for why he shot her. According to the court record, he told investigators he was not angry. He just thought the robbery would be easier with one person instead of two.
You want to know what the real true crime is, Hunter?
What's that, Jacob?
When you spend all of that hard-earned money that you spent all week long working for on freaking kids' clothes of all things, and then suddenly, just weeks or months later, none of it fits anymore.
Yeah, or they wear an outfit like twice, maybe. Then it just sits in a tote or a drawer somewhere in your house for the next 4 years.
Exactly. And so that's why today we're partnering with Harris & Company Kids Consignment, which is a local children's consignment boutique where parents can actually make money back on all those clothes, shoes, toys, and baby items that their kids just outgrew.
And honestly, as the crime daddies, we support anything that helps moms and dads survive raising tiny humans because kids are expensive. Trust me.
Heard that. The cool part is you don't have to do all that annoying work either. Like you can just come in, bring them your items, they will sort it, they will list it, they will sell it, and you will earn commission. That's right. You will make money whenever your stuff sells.
And if you're shopping instead of consigning, you can get boutique-style kids' clothes without paying boutique prices, which in this economy feels like a crime to not mention to you.
And they even have online sales going right now as we speak, and eventually they're going to have a storefront coming. And so if you want to go ahead and check them out on Facebook, go ahead and search up Harris & Company Kids Consignment, or you can go and visit their website at harriscochild.com. Make sure you support local families, support local businesses, and tell them that the Crime Daddy sent you.
All right, now let's get back into some true crime. I can't stand this guy. I mean, you literally took somebody's life over some lottery tickets that you couldn't cash. I mean, thank God he didn't shoot the other lady that was with Brenda, because at that point, what did he have to lose? But it's just so sad that he took this lady's life for apparently no reason at all. Like, I can't fathom that thought process inside this young man's head. The only excuse that he could ever have was that his frontal lobe wasn't all the way developed, which it shows in the sloppiness of the crime itself and how he did it. But there's just no excuse on a planet to ever take another human being's life. I take that back. There is one excuse, and I'll say it here. If anybody ever messes with my kids or wife, you better watch out.
Yep. Now, eventually this case does go to trial. Martin waived his right to a jury trial after prosecutors withdrew their intent to seek the death penalty. And so death penalty's off the table, and so he wants to have what's considered a bench trial. And if you guys don't know what a bench trial is, a trial where the judge decides the outcome, decides if you're guilty or innocent, and decides what your sentence is. Now, poor Miss Helen Shepard, her testimony became central to the case because she was the only witness, along with the surveillance footage that kind of backed up what she said. And then obviously they have the recovered lottery tickets and the weapon found during the search that only has one missing bullet in the chamber. And then Martin's own statements to investigators kind of seal the deal. Prosecutors argue that the robbery had been planned in advance, pointing to the fact that Martin had obtained the gun days earlier, waited outside the store before it opened, and entered before the doors could be relocked. And he continued the robbery even after Brenda had been shot.
So literally all the evidence that they need to go ahead and pursue a conviction of first-degree murder.
Yes, premeditated. He had every opportunity to back out at multiple steps. He had got the gun days before. He very well could have got the gun and then backed out, or he could have got there the day of at 5:15. 10 minutes later, thought, you know what, I shouldn't do this. He didn't. He waited. And whenever he got in, he could have not pulled the trigger, but he did. And instead of walking out like he should have, he pursued the rest of the robbery. So he showed full intention to do what he did.
And I'm guessing since he's got a bench trial that he's going to get life in prison instead of the death penalty.
Correct. The judge ultimately found Martin guilty of first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, and 2 counts of armed criminal action. And he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for murder, along with additional prison sentences for robbery and armed criminal action charges. Pretty much he's not getting out anyway.
And I like that because I like the fact that they sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole because he's so young that he could have served a life sentence and still got out. I don't believe that this guy deserves to walk the same streets as everyone else that's just a normal contributing member to society.
Now, Martin did later appeal the conviction, arguing that because he was only 19 at the time of the crime, that life without parole was unconstitutional against his Eighth Amendment right to not have cruel or unusual punishment. The prosecutor said after proven deliberation, the Missouri Court of Appeals rejected any argument and affirmed their conviction.
So, like, in my opinion, as far as between death penalty and life in prison, I think that the victim's family should be able to choose what the perpetrator gets. That's just my opinion. I know everybody's got their own opinion on a death penalty. In my opinion, in a death penalty case, if all the evidence is there that the perpetrator is 100% guilty without a chance, give him the old Yeller treatment behind the barn. But in this case, since he did have a bench trial, I understand why he was given the life in prison without parole.
Yeah.
And also with death case sentences comes years and years of trials and all that the family has to go to court and relive it, and the taxpayers have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in court fees, and the taxpayers also have to pay an extremely large amount to give somebody the lethal injection that the death penalty now takes.
Mm-hmm. And if you already don't like this guy, Hunter, I'm going to make you not like this guy even more. So in 2018, whenever he tried to appeal his conviction, he had the gall to come out and say that he was not the one who pulled the trigger, which killed Brenda Smith on that May 18th day. He admitted that he did have a role in the crime. However, he stated that he was a lookout during the robbery, and the robbery was actually committed by a 15-year-old acquaintance.
Is this guy an idiot? Because I'm sure that Helen watched probably one of her close friends that she worked with, Brenda, get murdered right in front of her, and I'm sure that she could point this offender's face out of any lineup. And if Helen says it was only him, I don't understand how he can even fathom saying that in court.
Not to mention, lottery tickets was found in his car at his house, and the gun was found in his house, and it belonged to his stepdad. How are you going to blame it on somebody else? Are you saying that someone else pulled the trigger, but they gave you all the evidence, and then you just got stuck with it? So while he showed up to court dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and tie, he spoke softly on the witness stand. They said he broke into tears several times as he spoke about the events leading up to the fatal shooting. In response to questions from his attorney, Kevin Gow with the Missouri Public Defender's Office, Martin explained that he became involved in the robbery plot because he was frightened of the 15-year-old's uncle. He stated that he was worried that the man, who was a member of a gang, would kill him or his family. He testified that he became frightened of the uncle after an incident that happened on October 7th, 2011. He alleged that it was on that night in New Madrid County that he witnessed a man along with several others murder a man and a woman, then burn their bodies. According to Martin, in May 2015, he was approached by the 15-year-old who said he wanted to become a member of the gang by committing a robbery. He said, quote, "I heard you wouldn't snitch, and I need your help." Also, he said the teen knew Martin had access to a gun. In his testimony, Martin said that when the teen exited the business the morning of May 18th, 2015, he gave the gun to Martin and the lottery tickets taken during the robbery. Martin said the teen confessed to him that he had shot the store clerk. He was then cross-examined by Monty Platts with the Missouri Attorney General's office. Martin insisted that he didn't go to the police because he was scared. Platts asked Martin if by coming forward now his family might be in danger, prompting Martin to respond, quote, "They will be." To which Platts says, quote, to Martin, "You mean you are willing to put their lives on the line today, just not 3 years ago?" Pointing out that this was the first time the story ever came out 3 years after the crime was committed. He also noted that before revealing the story, Martin had not contacted law enforcement about possible danger to his family. J.D. Patton, an investigator with the Missouri Highway Patrol, also testified that Tuesday morning. He spoke of following up on several leads and interviews. During one interview, Patton said that he was told by an individual about seeing a man that was not Martin change out of a dark hoodie, similar to the one worn by the assailant during the robbery. As the trial opened Monday, Martin's public defender presented a motion calling for the dismissal of the murder charge, stating that it violated the Eighth Amendment rights and that he was 19 at the time of the crime and that he was not mentally competent. I'm sorry, but whenever I was 19, I definitely understood what murder was.
I mean, yeah, I think when you're 5 years old or even younger, you understand that you should not do that. You understand some sort of value of life. Let me put it to you like this. Say you're a little kid and you just get a puppy or you just get a kitten and you love it to death. Would you not be devastated if it randomly died?
Yeah.
So at that young of an age, you understand the value of life.
Yeah, from a very young age, you understand that life is precious, and you understand that taking life can be permanent. It's not something you learn later in life. You learn from a young age how to process death. Now, poor Miss Helen Shepard, who had went through this 3 years previously, was back on the stand. She said that Smith and her arrived at the store. Smith got there first because Miss Brenda was pretty poignant and she showed up early, but she wouldn't go into the store or into the building until Helen was there with her. Shepard said she entered the building first, and then she heard Smith say, "Oh no." She said whenever she turned around, she saw a black man with a mask over his nose and a gun in his hand. The man forced his way inside, and he demanded money. When Smith told the man the money was in the safe, Shepard testified he told her to hurry up and get the money, and she said, "You might as well shoot me because I can't," and that's whenever he shot her. And obviously at this point, that's whenever Shepard on the stand starts to break into tears, reliving that moment again. Now, obviously, I told you what happened next, where he had threatened her and pushed her towards the back of the building, and eventually she gives over some lottery tickets, and she finally convinced him to leave her alone. Whenever she was asked to describe the assailant, Shepard said that he was about 5'7". While he didn't have any distinguishing marks, Shepard recalled that he had a soft voice and big, bright eyes. Corporal Noji McDaniels, an investigator with the Missouri State Highway Patrol, helped process the crime scene. In addition to the pool of blood, McDaniel said that he noticed lottery tickets on the floor of the business. He said his first contact was the Missouri Lottery Commission and began working with a tally made by store personnel and determined the serial numbers on the 16 missing scratch-off lottery tickets. Hunter, 16 tickets. Did this for 16 fucking lottery tickets.
That's crazy. I'm at a loss for words because I just can't process in my head why on earth that's even remotely close worth it to this guy to take such drastic actions as he did. I would go buy the guy 16 lottery tickets right now to bring Brenda's life back.
Yep. Now, McDaniels did say he attempted to gather DNA at the crime scene and dust for fingerprints. The evidence was turned over to the Madrid County Sheriff's Department. Della Hess, who was the manager of a convenience store in Bernie, like I told you, told the court that she was called to the front of the business on May 24th by one of her employees who had explained that a black man had brought in a lottery ticket to claim a $20 prize. And it was scanned and the machine rejected it. He wanted to go cash in $20. Does that just not eat at you, dude?
It does eat at me because even if he would have got the $20, that wouldn't even have paid for the gas that he had invested to drive between Parma and Dexter and Bernie and all around to even try and cash him. I mean, none of this makes sense. Everything was so senseless. The guy is a piece of shit because he can't even take accountability for his actions, and he's trying to blame somebody else. And I just don't even understand why he did that, because Helen would have been able to pick him out, because even saying it was somebody else, Helen would have known his body type. She would have known approximately his height and weight. So unless this mysterious other person was his twin, then it just doesn't even make a lick of sense. And I'm sure that she testified that there was only one guy there. There wasn't two guys there.
Exactly. And one of the saddest parts of this story is whenever they're actually interviewing Martin himself, and they tell him that he matches the description of a person that was involved in that robbery, and they point out that he has some of the stolen lottery tickets in his possession. Eventually, Martin begins to cry, and under his breath he says, quote, "Miss Brenda said shoot me, and I did."
Oh, poor me. You know that she did not mean that.
And after this is whenever he directed police to the location of the gun, the other lottery tickets, and the clothing in his bedroom.
Jacob, let me ask you a question. If I gave you one of my guns and I said, "Hey, Jacob, shoot me," would you shoot me?
No.
Exactly.
And I'm going to end talking about the case on this, but the final witness during the trial was Dr. Russell Diedker, who was a pathologist who testified that the cause of death for Smith was a gunshot wound to the head. He said based on his examination, the gun was less than 1 to 2 inches away from Smith's head at the time that it was fired. And so legally, that's where this case ends. But obviously for Brenda's family, it's never really ended at all. So to tie this back to the beginning, it just shows you how irrational people in poverty end up being. Martin, for 16 lottery tickets, took the life of a respected mother, grandmother, community member, worker, and it just shows you how deep the effects of poverty have on people's judgment and their actions. Not as an excuse, but as a valid explanation on how someone can go from being a soft-spoken individual to being a cold-blooded murderer, all for some money.
I don't even like to think about it as remotely being an excuse at all, because I've been poor in my life and I've never once thought about, hey, I should go murder somebody for a few dollars.
Yeah, it shows you how fast being poor can make you do bad decisions. So maybe some of my bad decisions that I've made from being poor don't result in murder, but I know I've made some pretty questionable decisions to get some money, Now, if you guys live in Missouri, you know that marijuana is legal, obviously, but there was a time whenever I was like 13 or 14 where I sold some dime bags to my buddies because, I was poor and I wanted to make some money. Not proud of it, but it's a part of my story. And it was just because I lived in poverty and money talks and bullshit walks. And so people tend to not think very clearly. This is not an excuse. It just can show you how desperate some people can get whenever money gets involved. That for the sake of just this small amount, this guy was willing to do something so monstrous and tear apart a whole family. Now, legally, that's where the case kind of ends. But for Brenda's family, obviously, it never ends. One thing that stood out while researching this case was how present Brenda still is in the lives of people who loved her. Usually, after a trial ends and the headlines fade away, victims slowly disappear from public memory while the details of the crime remain. But the opposite happens with Brenda's family because they refuse to let that happen. Years later, her family still updates a Facebook page called, quote, Justice for Brenda Smith. The page is filled with birthday posts, holiday messages, family photographs, memories, and notes that are written directly to her. Reading through it feels less like looking through a memorial page and more like watching an ongoing conversation between a family and the woman they lost.
I think that's amazing to keep somebody's name alive, that they're actively doing that.
And it's really nice. I went and looked at it, and every once in a while, someone in the family will go and write a post as if they're talking to her. And it's just a way for them to keep their grandma alive in any way possible.
I think Crime Daddies needs to use their Facebook page and go leave a comment.
I think we should too. Now, one of the posts I saw on there that was really touching said, quote, We love and miss you, Mom, but just as the good book says, we will meet you again. Another post describes her as being a best friend, a therapist, and the biggest confidant. And then there's tons of photos where you stop seeing Miss Brenda as a true crime victim, and you start seeing her for what she really was. She was a mother that laughed during Christmas. She was a grandmother that liked to be surrounded by her family. And she was a woman whose absence permanently changed the shape of the lives around her. Now, this is the part of stories like this that often get lost sometimes when you deal with true crime. The crime scene lasts a day, the investigation lasts months, the trial might last years, but grief never stops. As long as you are one of the ones who is around for the grief, it's around as long as you are. Brenda should have been able to retire just a few days after that. She should have had more birthdays. She should have had more holidays, more dinners with her children and grandchildren, more crab legs from Red Lobster. Instead, her family was left preserving her through photos, memories, keepsakes, and posts written years later because the love they had for her never really stopped. And maybe that's the real ending of the story, is that there isn't an ending. The conviction isn't the ending. The sentence wasn't the ending. The appeals that this guy had wasn't the ending. But the fact that over a decade later, Brenda Smith is still being remembered loudly and lovingly by the people who knew her best. And that's the case of Miss Brenda Smith. What do you think, Hunter?
I think that Brenda was a very loved woman. And I think that a scumbag of a human being ended up taking this lady's life. I definitely do not like the offender. And like I said during the episode, it almost feels like this piece of crap took everybody's grandma, because my grandma relates very heavily to Brenda as a person. So like, I feel connected to this, even though it wasn't my family personally involved, but I feel some of the pain.
Me too. And from someone who had such a close relationship to his grandma, this one kind of hit me hard because I just relate to it. Whenever I read about her, I can only think about how I would feel if someone would take my poor sweet grandma away from me. I can't relate to the grief of having them taken in such a tragic way, which I'm sure comes with a lot of anger. I know it would for me if that happened in my family. But it's really sad. And if there's anything we can do as crime daddies is to focus on Brenda as a person and not what happened to her, because that's where her story is. So focusing on the fact that she was such a loving grandma, the fact that she was so present for everybody, she was always laughing and smiling, that even the owners of the convenience store she worked at called her family. It just shows you how big her personality was for people around her to love her so easily. So if you guys want to go and support and leave a message for Brenda or for the family, you can go to their Facebook page called Justice for Brenda Smith, and Crime Daddies is going to go make a comment on there and just say, we heard the story. If you guys go on there, say you heard the story and just share some of the love. And we actually got this case suggested from someone in the family, and it's went through not only the one who suggested it, but Miss Brenda's children as well have heard what we were going to talk about today. So I hope we were able to do it justice. and shed some light on how great of a person your mom and grandma was to the world and is to your family even to this day. But that's all I got for you today, Hunter. That's a sad one. And cases like this really are heavy to do. It's a little bit different than doing some other cases because I relate to it pretty big time.
And it seems like as crime daddies, we are getting more people wanting us to cover crimes that have taken place in their family. I want to say this because there's a lot of people that do not understand crime. Me and Jacob are not truly obsessed with the crime itself. Me and Jacob are more obsessed with the victims, who they were as a person. We're obsessed with the psychology of the killer and how one gets to be that way. It's never about the crime itself. Like, we don't just love talking about it. Hearing about what happened to Brenda and me hearing that, thinking about, like, if that was my grandma, how that would make me feel. So I understand that it is a very sensitive topic to a lot of people if they have had family that have suffered this way. Like I said, we want to paint Brenda's picture as a very loving person that a lot of people loved. So that being said, it's never about the crime. It's more of the life of the victim.
And if Miss Brenda's story touched anybody today like it touched mine, the next time you're in the area of a Red Lobster, go get yourself some crab legs and enjoy them and think about how this sweet old grandma would love to be eating them with everybody, because it sounds like she was not just a grandma to her family, but she was like the grandma of the town. Yeah, that's the story of Miss Brenda Smith. So thank you guys for tuning in for their episode this week and being here for the easy ones and the hard ones, because we do a lot of stuff that's hard to talk about sometimes and can really weigh heavy. And I hope that we tell it in a way that is easy for us to all share and move along with. And we appreciate you guys coming back week by week to be a part of it. Now, as always, if you guys would like to support for the price of $0.00, all it takes is to follow us on social media and every platform that you can listen to podcasts on. It costs no money to go and show your crime daddy some support, and we make no money from this as well. So just full transparency, any support you guys can give us is awesome, and we appreciate what we've gotten so far. But if you guys can go and like, comment, subscribe, follow, whatever you have to do on any platform, interact with our posts, share us to your story whenever we drop episodes. You can find us on Facebook at Crime Daddies, Instagram at Crime Daddies Pod. You can find me on Facebook, just the name Jacob Smith, and then you can find Hunter
Ben Frampton,
and then his TikTok is
Hunter_Semo,
and his Instagram is
Hunter.Semo.
And if you guys are ever interested in watching our cases live before they are ever dropped, we also stream them live on TikTok whenever we record. It's currently almost 1 a.m. And so we are doing our Crime Daddies thing at nighttime. So if you guys want to go support us, those are the best places to do so. The rest of your week, just keep Miss Brenda and her family in your mind and just keep her memory alive. But that's all we got. Peace out, y'all.
Goodbye, everybody. Until next week.